Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the next edition of the Thea Ventures Unheated podcast. We're an early stage climate tech fund based in India. And today we're delighted to have Victoria Beasley from Gigascale Capital joining us to share her insights on the climate tech landscape. So thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here. Big fan of what you all are doing.
Wonderful. So just we can get started by giving a little bit of a bio, which I'll just touch on Gigascale and also on Victoria's background. So Gigascale Capital was founded by Mike Schroepfer, the former CTO of Meta, in 2023. It's a new kind of climate-focused investment firm dedicated to building and growing the companies of the future that will fight climate change. The firm brings a unique combination of founder, investor, and operator experience within the deep science, technology, and climate industries. And Gigascale helps passionate entrepreneurs from pre-seed to Series A to scale their businesses and deliver the vision of solving the climate crisis. And a little bit on Victoria's background. So Victoria is a partner at Gigascale Capital and brings over 15 years experience working at the forefront of climate solutions as an investor, founder, and operator. Previously, she was a general partner at Prelude Ventures, which is a $1.5 billion AUM climate fund. And Victoria has invested there in clean energy, mobility, food and agriculture, circular economy, and also carbon markets. And she previously founded an agricultural supply chain company. She led finance in the energy sector, and she also developed climate change strategies at BCG. Victoria holds an MBA and MS in Environment and Resources from Stanford and a BS in Biology from the University of North Carolina. So wonderful. So great to have you here, Victoria. And just to jump into the first few questions, would love it if you could, briefly describe Gigascale and how the combination of founder, investor, and operator experience shapes your investment thesis, and how do you balance the dual role as both an investor and an accelerator in scaling up startups from pre-seed to Series A.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and thank you for the very generous introduction. So, as you said, Gigascale, we're all about backing climate tech companies that can transform the world's largest sectors, really to make the clean choices, the climate-friendly choices, the no-brainer choices. When we started Gigascale, we had the idea that there are really three attributes that didn't exist together in the way that we envisioned might be helpful for founders. And so that's really kind of the roots of our founding, and it has continued to be how we organize our team and how we support founders. So the first is that we have a deep understanding of climate. As you said, I've been in this space for 15 years, first as an operator, and then for the last 10 or so as an investor. I've seen the ups and downs. I know the alphabet soup. I've seen policy changes. I've seen many things that have come in circles. And I think, as we know, climate is both a long-term challenge and a very short-term challenge. And I think having someone and having an ethos on our team of being there in the trenches when things get hard, when things change, when the unexpected happens is really important, particularly in climate. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is that we really think it's helpful to have true technical acumen on our team, the ability to characterize technical risk and invest against it. Evelyn, one of my founding colleagues, is a Cambridge PhD in chemical engineering. She's also a founder herself. But she and a couple other members on our team, we have a couple mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and then we have a broad group of phone a friend folks who we call and cultivate relationships with so that we don't shy away from characterizing and, like I said, making investments that require what is going to be first of a kind technology innovation, whether that's from physics to chemistry to biology. We really pride ourselves on craving understanding at a deep level the technical aspects of some of these innovations. And then the third pillar is that we bring operational excellence and experience. As you mentioned, Mike Schroepfer is a longtime CTO at Meta, among other roles. When he started there, I think the whole company was in the 300 people range. And when he left his full-time role a couple years ago, he had 35,000 people reporting up to him. And so I can credibly say, very few people have seen those increments of scale. And it matters. I mean, he's shipped software, obviously, but he's also shipped a lot of hardware. He's built data centers, built an AI lab, et cetera. Evelyn and I have also both had deep operating experience. I was at a solar company back in the early days of Clean Tech 1.0, raised a couple $100 million of funding, have scaled from the bench to off the R&D line to scaled up domestically and internationally. And similarly, Evelyn also founded a company and sold it. And so we, different forms of operational experience across our founding team and across the broader team, but we really believe it matters when you're in a board meeting, at a boardroom, and also just when, a founder calls and it's like, hey, I've never done this before. Can you answer what feels like a silly question? Because I don't want to spend an hour going to research, where to put my cash, what kind of bank account to put my cash in after a fundraise, or, hey, what's the best practice in, doing 360 reviews, or, hey, can you sit down and think through with me our cadence of shipping this product? Are we going fast enough? Are we going too fast? Hey, how do we deal with this, bump we just found in the supply chain? All of those things we feel like we can be better, that we can support our founders better given the experience that we've had. So that's what that's what Gigascale is all about. A deep understanding of climate. We have real technical acumen on our team, and then we bring operating experience to the table.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that very sort of clear summary of the work and the portfolio selection as well, and the way you go about investing and your evaluation process. So I had a few questions. You mentioned first of a kind projects and, scaling up some of this hard tech. So in your portfolio, what's been sort of some of the examples of technology that's really on the cusp of frontier climate change or frontier development that you think, that your team did an especially detailed and rigorous job with evaluating, even though no one else kind of knew what that technology was?
Yes, goodness. It's hard to pick favorites, but I'll select a few maybe across our portfolio. So the first that comes to mind is a company called Gigascale. They are really reimagining factories as climate solutions rather than polluters. So they take an electrochemistry approach to transforming carbon emissions into useful products. They can start with ethylene, which is growing at something like a 4% annual rate per year, and could soon pollute, 10 times as much as aviation. But they take an approach that uses clean electricity to turn those carbon emissions into useful products. And by the way, we didn't talk about this in the beginning with Gigascale, but they do it at a green discount. We've heard about the green premium, how much are customers willing to pay above and beyond the commodity price for a climate benefit in this case. And I would say core to our investment thesis is looking for companies and approaches that actually produce their products at a green discount. And oh, by the way, just happen to have a massive climate benefit. So Gigascale is one. Another example is a company called Pasture Bio. So in a very different space, they are approaching the enteric emissions challenge in cattle with an mRNA vaccine approach to reduce enteric emissions. Radical approach, fits within a normal ranching operation, and if it works, can have massive opportunities. They're benefiting from the scaled infrastructure that came out of the vaccine rush after COVID, but really applying cutting edge technology to address what is a massive challenge. And then maybe I'll just give you one more, which is sort of a different angle. A company called Arbor. Arbor is producing carbon negative power that again is cheaper and faster to deploy than traditional electricity plants, so energy plants. You'll notice a theme in our thesis. They just announced a Microsoft deal to remove 5,000 tons of carbon a year and produce 5 megawatts of electricity. It's more than enough to power 4,000 U.S. homes year round. That team comes out of SpaceX, where they were literally building rocket engines. And so now they're taking that technology, that expertise, those scaled supply chains, et cetera, and applying it to power generation in a way that, again, has this amazing climate benefit, but also happens to be cheaper and faster to deploy.
Wow, those are fantastic examples. And what, just a follow-up question to those, I mean, what do you think makes them, cheaper? Because that's one of the biggest issues that we find even working in our emerging market of India.
Yeah.
Without a subsidy, it's very difficult to reach the cost economics or, basically have that discount. So, and also to get customers to adopt. So is there any special formula that they use or process engineering of some kind?
I mean, so I'll answer in two ways. On the investment evaluation side, we spend a lot of time in the early days on the techno-economic analysis, or the TEA. That's a place where kind of all of the technology assumptions, all of the supply chain assumptions, any incentive assumptions come into play. that is, I would say, the core of our diligence efforts to try to understand from a first principles basis, do they have a shot at getting to a price that is less or in some other way beneficial? So I think that's key. But then once we've made the investment, I don't know that there's a magic formula. We focus a lot across not just companies that are scaling hardware, but in general focus on evaluating opportunities in entrepreneurship through through how fast can folks learn. So we talk about learning rate a lot. We have a core belief that rapid experimentation and iteration often wins in comparison to a protracted planning process. It's a little bit different when you're scaling hard tech, right? The mistakes you make are a little bit less forgiving. You can't always iterate, at the same pace you could in software. So the other thing we do is really work with entrepreneurs who know this better than anybody, how to balance out their milestones so that they're achieving enough between iterations, but not swinging so far that it would be hard to make adjustments along the way. So yeah, it's a great question. There's no question that it is a challenge in this space to find the green discount and then execute against it. But the other thing I'll say, which I referenced in a bit, this time, and I'm comparing it to sort of the early days of clean tech, this time there are many more supply chains that are built out that are fundamentally necessary to getting down the cost curves. So, when solar was being built, when electric vehicles were being built, a lot of the underlying supply chains, whether it was lithium ion batteries or some of the other core components to solar panels, the companies innovating were also having to do the innovation on the supply chains. And that's not the case now. You also see, tools like additive manufacturing or 3D printing that allow prototyping to be much cheaper, much faster in a way that used to take, months or even longer than that in the beginning. So I think there's no one solution, but I think thankfully we've seen an accumulation of a number of tools that have given more companies a shot at building something that can get to at or below the cost of the incumbent or commodity price.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point, actually. Having that supply chain that is already built out and having the customer adoption, much more readily available and aware. And I think one other piece that comes to mind is, of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning, which I'm sure you see in a lot of your business models that you're looking at. And I'm under the impression that that would probably come under your asset light portfolio. Is that right? Where you're looking at softwares, or if you have a split of some kind between asset
Yeah,
heavy and asset light.
it's a great question. We don't really think about our portfolio in terms of asset heavy or asset light. I think we look at things from a fundamental cost and benefit perspective. Having said that, I think fundamentally climate is an atoms and a watts challenge. And so our belief is that you can't solve climate without addressing some of the physical innovation needs that we have in order to get to a decarbonized economy. However, there are some places where the technology actually is good enough, and what's needed is on the software side. I'll give you an example, which is represented by an investment we made in a company called Arch. Amazing company, super early stage, but we I didn't mention this earlier, but we take a very thesis driven approach where we can, so that we come to investment opportunities with a perspective on a space. We've talked to lots of customers, we've talked to a number of folks along the value chain. In the case of Arch, we actually started a thesis looking at hardware and heat pumps, this magical device with a terrible name that really can reduce emissions across heating and cooling really globally. So we started out looking at a variety of innovations. Can you install it faster? Can you have a smaller footprint? Excuse me. Can the efficiency be better? Can the price be cheaper? And at the end of that part of our thesis building, we decided that it's actually not the challenge. What the challenge is your heating or air conditioner breaks. You're hot, you're cold. You call the technician. You want them to get there as soon as possible. You want them to fix it as soon as possible. And oftentimes, the system that gets replaced is a conventional HVAC system because it's either what's on the technician's truck, or the technician doesn't feel empowered or skilled or educated enough about the particulars of the heat pump systems to be able to articulate it effectively to the consumer. There's a whole bunch of other stuff related to, lack of easy financing in that space, an understanding of how to size the system, because it's not been the predominant technology. And so in this case, we made an investment in Arch, which is taking a software approach to solving these very challenges. So um, there's no question there are opportunities in both spaces, but I would say we try to have the thesis be our guide and try to be objective about where the challenges are, and then bet behind the technology that is most likely to unlock the massive market.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. And when you're thinking about the deployment of your current fund, and what's sort of the, allocation that you're looking at towards different sectors? What's the gestation period? I'm assuming it's a regular sort of 10-year term of a fund. So, when you were fundraising or talking to investors, or getting sort of interested parties on board, what was sort of the conversations around how quickly can you exit some of these companies or take on a different risk model? Because of course, like you rightly said, climate has an asset or sort of a product heavy Adams and Watts portfolio element to it. So it's not going to be a traditional SaaS kind of model. So how did you go about thinking about portfolio construction for this fund?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, we've had active, very thoughtful conversations about it. On the one side is, we know the equation that works in venture. It's a power law business. If you look at, the data that is available, it makes sense to have a portfolio of 25 to 30 companies. It makes sense to have a fund horizon of something like 7 to 10 years. And so I think on the one hand, we're backing amazing entrepreneurs doing really hard things. So do we need to innovate on the actual fund side? On the other hand, there is an opportunity from a business perspective that happens to have an impact to be innovative and to try new things. So one example, we are proud supporters of Activate, which is an amazing program that started out of Berkeley to help entrepreneurially minded technical students, mostly PhDs, transition and evaluate whether they want to bring their technology out of the lab and see if there's a commercialization opportunity. We are proud supporters of their venture partner program. That's not a typical venture investment, but in the same side, we think about it as having access to dozens of promising technologies. And so it's a great question, and one that is still an active conversation. But I think at the end of the day, figuring out at the end of the day, figuring out how to find companies that have an outsized chance of success at massive scale is what we're all about. I think I'll make two other comments. One, I think sometimes, and I've been in this a long time, but I still forget sometimes how many trillion-dollar industries we're addressing. These are not small markets, right? $1.8 trillion global power generation market. I think it's on track to be close to 4 trillion by 2032. The global chemicals market is something like $5 trillion and change. The waste industry itself is $1 trillion. The cattle industry, I mentioned in relevance to pasture bio, is another $1 trillion industry. Just sort of go on down the line. And so, yes, hardware solutions can be challenging to scale, but so too can software companies. And I think to your question around exit timeline, I think sometimes there's a narrative that is entrenched that your software companies exit faster than hardware companies. If you look at the data, and obviously people could slice it and choose the axis in different ways, but all the data we've seen suggests that it's not that different. Maybe 9 to 10 years. But that's not much different than pure software companies. And so we really are focused on, what we think most venture firms are focused on, which is going after massive markets. First of all, backing on amazing entrepreneurs who are trying to do something that's never been done before in a massive market on a time scale that makes sense. And so, we get the benefit of also having oh, by the way, it also happens to benefit climate, but that's really our orientation.
Understood. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I really love the bold vision of the fund as well. And then pretty sure that's why you get your best pick of great entrepreneurs. And sort of linked to that question, there's so many climate funds in the US. I'm sure you're at more than 60 or so. And funnily enough, in India, we only have five or six climate funds, and it's growing quickly. We were one of the first actually to start. But I'm just curious, how you sort of differentiate yourself compared to other climate funds. Of course, you have some fantastic technical acumen on your team, and I'm sure you work very closely with the portfolio. But are there sort of any specific areas or subsectors that your fund, would go deeper into and therefore attract more entrepreneurs from those particular areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I do think really it's the combination of having folks who've understood climate and been in its space for a long time, ability to do real technical diligence and then offer technical support along the way, and then bring operational experience to bear. I'd say beyond that, as it relates to specific sectors, I'll give you two examples that we're looking at right now, but it changes over time. As I mentioned, we try to be as thesis driven as we can. We think it makes us more useful to the founders to show up even to a first conversation and have a perspective and have talked to the customers, have talked to the value chain folks as well. So on the one hand, there'll be two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, we're still very interested in clean baseload power, and I say still because this has been an ongoing search for a decade plus. I think we are so fortunate that solar and wind have scaled in the way that they can, but there are limitations, as we've always known. They are not firm, clean baseload power. They're intermittent. And so some of the places we're spending time right now, for example, are in geothermal, where there's a bunch of interesting innovation, bringing technologies from other sectors, going deeper into the Earth's crust to find a more reliable source. Lots of open questions, a lot of things that have never been done before, but we can certainly see the need for that clean baseload power at a, again, cost basis that makes sense and can compete with the cheapest fossil sources around. So a bunch of other things related to clean baseload, but Arbor is another example of that. But I'd say that is a space where we continue to spend time. On the other side, we are focused on what can enable increasing throughput, increasing capacity, increasing utilization of existing assets. What can you do in industrial heat that's interesting? What can you do on the grid to help ease the, I think, under talked about squeeze on transmission and distribution lines? What can you do to make interconnection more seamless? Some of these require, no question, a lot of policy involvement, and some sectors and some innovations may not be appropriate for a venture tool. But we do think that there are a number of technology solutions that can help address some of what have seemed to be intractable challenges of just improving our existing set of infrastructure. So we look all the way from super innovative, applying rocket ship technology to energy production, all the way through what can we do that's actually relatively simple to increase in the case of the grid, increase the capacity that we have on the grid as we're trying to scale all these other technologies.
Got it. Understood. And I suppose the founders, I mean, to your point, when you mentioned that before you even have a first conversation with founders, they're already impressed by your knowledge and your background in a particular space. I think that speaks volumes towards, the type of diligence that you do, even without even having a startup in mind. So you've done.
We try to be. I mean, I think it's for our own benefit, but I do think we've gotten a lot of feedback that it's a more useful, it's a better conversation for founders when they show up and we have deeper questions and we have a perspective and we can say, oh yeah, we talked to 3 of your customer archetypes a couple weeks ago. Let us share what we learned. I think one of the great parts of this business too is we get to learn, but I think in the moments where we can really apply it and have a conversation with an entrepreneur in the way that their eyes light up because we really get it, I think it's a really important part of our formula.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we aspire to do the same thing at Thea Ventures as well when we have those first conversations. So I was curious to understand, with the customers that are adopting the solutions that your startups in your portfolio are are developing. What's been some of the pushbacks that you've seen from customers, or how difficult is it for them to adopt? And these are particularly for hard to abate sectors like oil and gas, steel, cement, and others.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I think, first of all, understanding the true needs of the customer, I think are really important. Better, cheaper, faster, all of those things are useful and often needed from industry. But I think there are other things that, as you have more nuanced conversations, you realize that a lot of the time it needs to be a drop-in solution. Oftentimes they want to be able to, have a modular system so they can try it, but then scale it. Oftentimes, there are physical constraints. We think about industrial heat, for example. You can't just squeeze in a massive multi-container ship size module in the middle of an industrial plant oftentimes. And so I think while we definitely appreciate and try to cultivate a sense of innovation and willingness to take a little bit of risk from on the part of the incumbents, I think the more we can do and entrepreneurs can do to understand the very tactical needs often at the end of the day of the incumbents to being able to try something new, the better traction we have seen.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. So I just have, just two or three questions left for this conversation. And one of them actually is about talent. So, you're
Mm.
living in the Bay Area. I'm sure you see some fantastic entrepreneurs coming up almost every day, and even through some of these universities like Berkeley and Stanford and others. But how do you go about sort of, really sourcing these entrepreneurs? And do you see any trends of entrepreneurs coming from the non-typical locations? So from the
Yeah.
non-pedigree Ivy League schools, or from towns in the US that, you wouldn't normally think that they would be generating this talent interest in it. And how do you see that going forward in the next few years?
Yeah, I love this question. Because I've been in this space so long, I often get the question of like, what's different between the beginning now and then? I think talent is one of the key things that is different from 10 years ago. And it's different in a few different dimensions. First of all, you don't have to be an engineer to work in climate. Climate companies need marketers. They need finance professionals. They need technologists of all stripes, no question. But oftentimes, we're hearing, gosh, I just cannot, I'm doing great on the technical side, but what I actually need is somebody to help me tell the story, for example. And so I think there's been an acknowledgement and an interest that climate is for everyone. And so we've seen across disciplines, folks coming in. To your question about geography, the other thing is, I mentioned a number of the industries that we think about that are massive industries. They have a lot of people working in them, a lot of people that don't necessarily, live in the Bay Area or in London or in New York or other larger, traditionally thought of as venture or tech hubs. So we're seeing people coming out of oil and gas. We're seeing people coming out of other traditional industries, cement, et cetera, and applying their expertise, their knowledge, their networks, their supply chains to an innovative approach that's in the climate space. I think I feel a lot of encouragement and excitement, helping to seeing those folks come into this space. And then to the extent we can come together, bring together technologies that are coming out of universities, experienced operators who are coming out of industry, I think that's one of the formulas that we get really excited about, because again, you can take what's new and what's climate specific and then bring in all the tools, the scale, the experience, the networks from people who have been in traditional industry. So I'm very bullish about what the talent influx is going to mean for solving the climate crisis. We need more. We're not there. But I do think there's been a massive shift in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree with you. I mean, even in India, we're seeing a lot of these second time founders that have previously run businesses in fintech or consumer or logistics, and a lot of them moving into climate as their second innings. So that's been encouraging. And of course, they know how to
Yeah.
build businesses, and they know how to team up with scientists and engineers and,
I'll
scale
give you
companies.
absolutely right. I'll give you a couple fun sort of numerical examples, really just from last week. At New York Climate Week, signed up for a bunch of events, some really small events, some larger, and there were a couple that in preparing for the event, they sent out notice emails reminding people of the logistics, and they said, if you can't come, please let us know because we have a 600-person wait list. We have a 5,000-person wait list. We have a on down the line. And I smiled at those because it really was not long ago at all that there weren't 600 people on the whole, in the whole country, who were actively thinking about and wanting to meet on a certain day about climate. And so I think it's really energizing to see that level of influx of talent and skills coming. And to your point, I think it's a global phenomenon that's really encouraging. If you take it even a step further up the education train, looking at how many classes are climate related and even climate entrepreneurship related, and even more specific within that, that is a massive shift from 10 years ago. And so I think from a student standpoint too, we're only just getting started, and how many people are going to be working to find solutions in climate.
Yeah, absolutely. And not even maybe just to be operators, but also maybe to join VC funds and to join the
Yeah.
financing, space as well. So I think it's super encouraging. I think, sort of my final question actually is just about your view on the emerging market landscape. So of course, your fund focuses only in the US, and I don't know if you focus also on Europe and other regions, but I'd love to get your take on, because our fund is obviously based in India. And so a lot of the action on climate is actually happening in the global south, and a lot of the impact of, big climate. I would say weather hazards and droughts and hurricanes, et cetera, also being felt in the global south. So, what is your thought process about, examples of companies or interesting innovations that have seen, a huge amount of large scale impact, being built in the global south, and the potential for your fund to consider these opportunities?
Yes. When we first met and I heard about what you were doing, my immediate reaction was, gosh, that we need so much more of this. And I'm so impressed. And frankly, I think there's an amazing, not only impact opportunity, but an amazing economic opportunity. Because to your point, I think there is not nearly enough investment being channeled into the global south. And to your point about impact, the climate crisis, in my opinion, is fundamentally a humanitarian crisis. And much of the impacts, the early ones, are going to be felt they already are being felt in the global south, whether those are floods or droughts or heat waves, et cetera. And so I think there's just tremendous opportunity. We have had active conversations about this, but because we are so hands-on with our portfolio companies, we've made the decision to focus mostly on North America. We've done a little bit in Europe, but mostly in North America. But I'll just say personally, it's a hard and frustrating imbalance sometimes to see how much opportunity there is, but to feel like we have to play to our strengths in a way that we can support founders in the best way we can. Having said that, I am a proud former D-Light intern, which is I think a company that's been around for one of the longest standing companies in the climate space, addressing electrification in the global south. They started out with solar powered lights and now have a whole suite of other clean energy powered home devices. I think they've transformed something like 175 million lives across 72 countries. If you don't know them, look them up. They're amazing. And so, part of what's fascinating about their story as a company is they started out as a class project at Stanford and now have gotten to all those global numbers of impact that I just mentioned. And so big fans and supporters of what they're doing, and we hope to see more of that. Another company that we have followed closely and really believe in what they're building is a company called Odyssey Energy. They have a platform that enables renewable energy companies, finance players, suppliers to deploy more projects faster, mostly focused on the global south. They have taken a number of technologies and approaches that were instrumental in helping solar, residential and otherwise small commercial, to scale in the US and in Europe as well, and are applying it in a way that makes sense to sub-Saharan Africa, to India, to other geographies. And so we continue to, while we haven't made those investments, we continue to believe that not only are they amazing, impact companies, but they also have the chance, have an opportunity to be. They already are. In the case of D-Light, really large businesses and great venture opportunities. So we hope that that flow of capital imbalance will continue to improve, because there's no doubt the opportunity is there, and I'm really excited to see what you all do in the space.
Great. Thank you so much. No, we're excited too. I think there's a huge economic opportunity, as you've mentioned, in multiple different areas. And I think we also look forward to taking the lessons, learning on what funds like you are deploying to in North America, and then hopefully applying those in the global south with some, tweaks here and there, given the local environment. But I think that concludes our conversation for today. So thank you so much, Victoria, for your time and
Thank
your
you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And we look forward to staying in touch and hopefully having you back for another one at some point soon.
Sounds great. We're rooting you on and looking forward to watching as your efforts continue to grow.
Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.